So this problem, they give you what the cosine of a double angle is. Cosine of a double angle is negative 12 over 13, and they also say that theta is in between 180 and 270, meaning theta is in quadrant 3. So you know your angle here is in quadrant 3, and really the first thing you do before you do anything is, of course, the question. They want you to find the 6 trigonometric functions of theta, right? There's sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Well, before you start working all that, let's get the signs right. In other words, if I know I'm going to have to find the sine of theta and the cosine of theta and the tangent of theta and the cosecant of theta, that's reciprocal of sine, the secant of theta, that's reciprocal of cosine, and the cotangent of theta, that's reciprocal of tangent. I think, oh, quadrant 3, x and y are negative, so that means sine is negative, cosine is negative. That means the reciprocals, cosecant and secant, are negative. Tangent, because x and y, sine and cosine, are both negative, negative divided by negative is a positive. So if tangent is positive, its reciprocal cotangent is positive. So before I do anything else, I mentally do this in my head, and for you guys, you ought to actually write this down. That way your answers will have the correct sign. I mean, that's half the battle, making sure you have the correct sign for your answers. So we need to find 6 answers here. We're not given any of these. We're given what the cosine of a double angle is. Don't confuse that with the cosine of a single angle. So step 1, I say, gosh, if they're giving me cosine of a double angle, I'll remember my double angle formulas for cosine. If I want to solve for sine, I can say cosine of a double angle equals 1 minus 2 times sine of a single angle squared. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say cosine of a double angle equals 1 minus 2 times sine of the single angle squared. So that's 1 minus 2 times sine of A squared. Oh, but heck, I don't know what sine of A is. I can't do that formula yet. What should I do? Oh, what do I know? I don't know what sine of A is. I put my parentheses in the wrong spot. What have I been given? I've been given what cosine of a double angle is. Cosine of a double angle is negative 12 over 13. So instead of putting a template over here, we're going to solve for sine squared A and then take the square root of both sides and solve for sine A. Well, I'm going to have to subtract 1 from both sides, so negative 12 over 13 minus 1 equals negative 2 sine squared A. 1 is 13 over 13, so that's negative 12 minus 13. Negative 12 minus 13, negative 25 over 13. See how I did that? 1 is negative 13, negative 13. Okay. So what's my next step? Well, my next step is solving for sine squared by doing the opposite. Right now it's getting multiplied by negative 2, so I want to divide both sides by negative 2, or multiply both sides by 1 over negative 2. So when I do that on the right-hand side, the negative 2 is going to divide out, and I'll just be left with the sine squared of the angle. Over here, that negative 2 is going to go and get multiplied times the 13. So I'm going to have negative 25 over negative 26. Well, let me write that like that. Negative 25 is up here, negative 26 is down here, and of course negative divided by negative is a positive, so this is 25 over 26, not 62. Fraction values here. So I then take the square root of both sides. Square root of both sides, I know that I'll just write it over here. If I take the square root of both sides, then sine of A is plus or minus 5 over the square root of 26. And of course I rationalize this. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 26 over the square root of 26. That will rationalize the denominator. I can't have two signs here. Oh, wait, over here I said sine of theta is negative. So I'm going to take the negative. Oh, why did I say A? Because the formula said A. Every one of these. Make sure your angles make sense. So if you ever make that mistake, right, in college they're going to get really picky. You don't want to have the question have you solve for theta and you've got A everywhere. So make sure you've got a theta here. Right? Look at how easy that was to fix. Made a goofy mistake. It's fixed. The 18. All right, so again, negative, because we're in quadrant 3, sine has to be negative. So I know that the sine of theta is negative 5 rad 26 over 26. Now, even though we rationalize the denominator, we're going to keep coming back to the unrationalized part. In particular, remember that cosecant and secant are reciprocals. So right now, if I just wanted to say, hey, what's cosecant theta? Well, it's just going to be the reciprocal of this, but this is going to be, messy to reciprocate. Wouldn't it be easier to take this? And I left out a C. Mr. Decker's dropping things left and right today. There we go. All right, so reciprocal of this version of sine, negative rad 26 over 5, negative square root of 26 over 5. So have different answers, right? Different forms of the correct answer. Here's sine, here's cosecant, 2 down, 4 to go. So the next step, at this point, you could keep doing trig ratios, but you know what? It's time to draw a triangle. We have to get 6 different answers. We've got 2. We need 4 more. You know what's really easy? We're going to draw a triangle in quadrant 3. If I draw a triangle in quadrant 3, my voice is a little scratchy today. So here's quadrant 3. I'm drawing a triangle. Going to make it nice and big to label it. There's my right angle. Remember, my angle theta is terminating somewhere in quadrant 3 here. Remember, in quadrant 3, remember your signs, right? Negative, negative. Remember, this is always positive. Hey, what do we know? We know that sine of theta, the sine of theta is negative 5 over 26, opposite over hypotenuse. Negative 5 going down in the y direction. And here's the square root of 26, right? And that means cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite, which is negative rad 26 over 5. We need to calculate what this side is so that we can find cosine and secant. So that's what we're going to do next. Remember that we can use reverse Pythagorean theorem. If this is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then I can subtract this squared from both sides. In other words, I know that this number here, we'll call it x, right? X squared plus negative 5 squared equals square root of 26 squared. That's Pythagorean theorem, right? I'm going to subtract that from both sides. I'm going to get my horizontal side here. X squared equals, the square root of 26 squared is 26, and if I subtract a negative 5 squared, negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. X squared equals 1. If I take the square root of both sides, this is plus or minus 1. Which one am I going to take? I'm in quadrant 3. I'm going to take negative 1. I found this side of my triangle that I sketched in quadrant 3. So check it out, right? Negative 1 squared plus negative 5 squared would be square root of 26 squared. The math works. Pythagorean theorem works. So what is cosine of theta? Well, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. It's negative 1 over square root of 26. But of course, we're going to reciprocate that. Not reciprocate it, sorry. We're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 26. We're going to rationalize the denominator in order to get that answer. So this is the answer for the cosine of a single angle. And of course, to get the secant, I can just say, I'm going to write it off to the right. Oh, sorry. I did that last time. Don't eliminate your writing space. So what I did here, I found this side is negative 1. Cosine of an angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. I multiplied top and bottom by square root of 26 over square root of 26 to rationalize the denominator. This becomes the cosine of the single angle. The secant of the single angle, I could reciprocate this, but isn't it a lot easier to reciprocate this version of cosine? In other words, the reciprocal of negative 1 over rad 26 is simply negative square root of 26. So there's secant theta, right? So I've got sine theta, cosecant theta, cosine theta, secant theta. The last thing I need to figure out is tangent and cotangent. Well, remember that tangent theta, tan theta is sine over cosine. Well, again, I could take the more complex version of sine, that's the exact answer, but I can also look at the less complicated version, negative 5 over rad 26. So sine is negative 5 over the square root of 26. And remember, tangent is sine over cosine. That means I can multiply by the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine was negative 1 over square root of 26, so instead of dividing by negative 1 over the square root of 26, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. Reciprocal of negative 1 over square root of 26 is negative square root of 26 over 1. Negative times a negative, that becomes a positive. The square root of 26's divide out. I'm left with a positive 5. So tan of the single angle is positive 5. Well, then what's cotan, right? If tangent is positive 5, that's our 5th of our 6 answers, cotangent is about the easiest thing in the world because it's the reciprocal of tangent. In other words, cotangent is 1 over 5. Make sure your signs all match up before you think you're done with the problem. Remember, the only ones that are positive are tangent and cotangent. Positive 5, positive 1 over 5. We have secant, negative square root of 26, cosine, negative rad 26 over 26, so both the cosine and its reciprocal are negative, right? And sine, negative 5 rad 26 over 26, and cosecant, negative rad 26 over 5. We have all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trigonometric functions of theta given cosine 2 theta is negative 12 over 13, and theta is in quadrant 3.